What's up, everybody? Happy hump day. Oh my goodness. What do you do to get over that hump in hump day? That's my question for you. And I hope your hump day is going well. I hope you've been able to get over that hump in hump day. And I hope you're staying dry. It's going to rain pretty much all week, like I've been saying. Maybe by Friday we'll see it clear up. But anywho, jumping right into it, the answer. This is Michael, by the way, on the graveyard shift in the wee hours of the night with your daily trivia question. The answer to the previous trivia question. A little bit more gravity there. All right. That's what I'm talking about. Love me some Papa Roach. Mix it with Maria Brink. Man, that's what I'm talking about. Anyways, the answer to... I digress just a little bit. Got a little excited. Had a little too much coffee. The answer to the previous trivia question was none other than the newspaper, the Washington Post. That was a pretty easy question, folks. Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein, Pentagon Papers. Come on, where you been if you couldn't answer that? The Washington Post newspaper was founded in 1877 by Stilson Hutchins, who was classified as a, quote, independent-minded Democrat. That's been up for debate over the years, by the way. It began publishing on Thursday, December 6th. It had a circulation of 10,000 copies straight out of the gate, which is not really not too shabby at all. Contained 4 pages and cost 3 cents a copy in 1880. 3 years later, after its initial origins and getting off the ground, it added a Sunday edition, because you've got to have a Sunday edition with the newspaper, and it became the city's first newspaper to publish 7 days a week. The Washington Post, however, struggled through the years getting off the ground, and it changed hands a few times, had a lot of financial difficulty. Skip to this was around the turn of the century, so skip to 1933, a man named Eugene Meyer famously purchased the paper at auction, believe it or not, for $825,000, which is pennies. Of course, that was a lot of money in 1933 in the middle of the Depression, right? So he was not an experienced person with newspapers at all, and he openly admitted he was a financier from California, but he ushered in a new set of principles and his own strong convictions about owning and operating a newspaper that had never been seen before in the Washington Post, or much less in the business, right? So Meyer's enlightened approach and policies began to turn the Washington Post around. In the first 10 years after he took over, circulation tripled to an incredible 162,000, and advertising increased significantly as well. Success. So he started bringing the newspaper up to a standard, earning a really good reputation. In the years that followed, the Post distinguished itself, as you have probably heard of the Washington Post before, it distinguished itself through its political reporting on the workings of the White House, Congress, and other aspects of U.S. government, and it soon earned the reputation as a newspaper of record, which is kind of a distinguished reputation that you want to earn if you're in that business in the United States. And by the 1970s, circulation topped 500,000 for the first time. Okay, and this is where the Washington Post really got put on the map. Speaking of the 1970s, the Washington Post began publishing excerpts from what became known as in history as the Pentagon Papers, containing allegedly secret information about the war in Vietnam. And when they were challenged on publishing these, the Supreme Court upheld the right of the Post and other newspapers to publish the Pentagon Papers in a very significant Supreme Court case. I think it was a ruling of 6-3, so it wasn't unanimous, but they did win the majority for sure. It's a very significant case. Additionally, the Post's Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who I referenced in the opening there, also referenced in the trivia question, began its very famous coverage of the Watergate break-in and the subsequent Watergate scandal that followed in the Nixon administration, that eventually would go on to contribute to the resignation of President Nixon. I believe it was 1974, as U.S. president, the only president to resign. Both Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein are still around. Bob Woodward, I believe, still holds a position at the Washington Post as a top editor, obviously, as you can imagine. Carl Bernstein, I think, left the Washington Post in 1977. But both, however, are still publishing books. They still reference their coverage of the Watergate scandal, the Washington Post. All the President's Men, I've talked about that before in previous trivia questions. Check that movie out if you get a chance. Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman. Great, great flick. And they're still around doing the talking head shows, CNN, political reporting, everything you could think of. They are often on CNN, for instance, talking about Donald Trump and all of his controversies. Anywho, I digress just a little bit. A couple of cool geek factoids about the Washington Post. The newspaper has won the Pulitzer Prize an incredible 65 times in history for its work. It's the second most of any publication after, of course, the New York Times, all the news that's fit the print, so to speak. The paper is the Washington Post is one of the few remaining papers to operate foreign bureaus, which is very significant. There's dozens, and in my history, there was just list upon list upon list of foreign bureaus of the Washington Post out there. So they are all over the world. The Post is credited with coining the term McCarthyism in a 1950 editorial cartoon. I had no idea. I had heard of McCarthyism, remembered it from my high school history class, a couple of history classes I took in my undergraduate years, but did not know that the Post coined that term. The Washington Post became one of the first newspapers in the country to appoint an ombudsman on its news staff, which is very important. Every large organization should have an ombudsman, without question. And the reason that I had Jeff Bezos pictorial in the initial trivia question is because in October 2013, the famous Graham family, who owned the paper, sold the paper to Nash Holdings, a holding company owned by none other than Amazon's Jeff Bezos, for $250 million. That's a pretty penny to pay. So the paper is owned by Jeff Bezos. If you did not know that, he's been in the paper as owning the Washington Post for a number of years. And people who like Jeff Bezos, who own companies like Amazon and other people like Apple and so forth, they tend to buy up like newspapers and so forth, like he did. So that's the Washington Post. Great history there. I remember the Washington Post very distinctly. In my family, we lived in suburban D.C. a few times, in Fairfax, in Woodbridge, the Northern Virginia, suburban D.C. area, when my dad was stationed out of the Pentagon multiple times during his military career. And I remember the Washington Post laying around the house all the time. I remember the big, thick Sunday edition, and I would pick up different sections of it and read it. It would be laying around on the dinner table for sure. The Washington Post was a mainstay in our house. So if you get a chance, pick up a copy and check it out. All right, folks, here we go. Getting over that hump day and moving along with the rest of the week for December 7th. Here's your brand new trivia question. On this day, in 1982, in Huntsville, Texas, a man named Charles Brooks Jr. receives this so-called more humane procedural method of punishment, which is still used a majority of the time in the United States to this day. Good luck, folks. Go have a wonderful Wednesday, will you? And I'll see you all for the rest of this week. Peace out.